Good morning. For this video, we discuss about philosophical of self. What is philosophy? The term philosophy means love of wisdom. In a broad sense, philosophy is an activity people undertaken when they seek to understand fundamental truths about themselves, the world in which they live, and the relationship to the world and to each other. As an academic discipline, philosophy is much the same. Those who study philosophy are perpetually engaged in asking, answer, and arguing for their answer to live as much basic questions. To make such a pursuit more systematic, academic philosophy is traditionally divided into major areas of study. The learning objectives are distinguish the different notions of the self from the point of view of the various Western philosophers, and examine the one view of the self and compare it to the various view of the philosopher.
Socrates, an examined life is not worth living. For ancient Greek philosophers, Socrates, the self is synonymous with the soul. Socrates was first thinker to focus the full power of reason in human self of who we are, who we should be, and who we will become. Plato, the soul is immortal. He believed that the self is synonymous with the souls. Plato's philosophy of the self can be explained as a process of self-knowledge and purification of the soul. The self consists of three parts, which is the reason, spirit or passion, and physical appetite. Aristotle, the soul is the essence of the self. For Aristotle, the body and soul are not two separate elements but are one thing. Aristotle suggested that anything with a life has soul. He introduced the three kinds of soul, which is the vegetative, sentient, and rational. Saint Augustine, the self is known only through knowing God. Saint Augustine integrated the ideas of Plato and Christianity. For Augustine, the self-knowledge is the consequences of knowledge of God. René Descartes, I think, therefore I am. For him, the act of thinking about the self is being self-conscious, is in it itself proof that there is the self. The soul and body are independent of one another, and each can exist and function without the others. John Locke, the self is consciousness. For Locke, the human mind at birth is tabula rasa or blank state. Self-consciousness is necessary to have a coherent personal self, identity or knowledge of the self as a person.
The video. There is no self. According to Hume, what people experience can all be categorized into impressions and ideas. Hume suggests that if people carefully examine their sense through the process of introspection, they will discover that there is no self. Immanuel Kant, we construct the self. According to Kant, it is the self that makes experiencing an intelligible world possible, because it is the self that is actively organizing and synthesizing all of our thoughts and perceptions. In other words, the self constructs its own reality, creating a world that is familiar and predictable. Sigmund Freud, the self is multi-layered. According to Freud, the self consists of three layers: the conscious, unconscious, and pre-conscious. The conscious self is governed by reality principle and is organized in ways that are rational, practical, and appropriate. The unconscious contains basic instinctual drives that would be considered socially taboo. The pre-conscious is located between the conscious and unconscious. Gilbert Ryle, the self is the way people behave. The self is the best understood as a pattern of behavior, the tendency or disposition for a person to behave in a certain circumstances. Ryle concepts of the human self thus provided the philosophical principle, I act, therefore I am. In short, the self is the same as bodily behavior. Paul Churchland, the self is the brain. For Churchland, the physical brain and not the imaginary mind gives us our sense of the self. The self is inseparable from the brain in the physiology of the body. All we have is the brain, and so, if the brain is gone, there is no self. Maurice Merleau-Ponty, The self is embodied subjectivity. All knowledge of ourselves and our world is based on subjective experience. The self can never be truly objectified or known in a completely sort of way.